The gospel of Jesus Christ is everything. When I was, let's lower my volume, please. It's very, very, very loud. Okay, thank you. When I was 4 years old, I made a big mistake. I was in kindergarten in Argentina, and they gave us a little bird that we needed to glue together. And I glued mine backwards. I put the wings, I guess, in the wrong place or something like that. And I got to my classroom, 4 years old, and I said, here's my bird. And the teacher was trying to be gracious. She says, it's glued backwards. I felt so bad about myself that I needed to do something to feel better. And I waited till break time, and all my classmates went away, and I went to the next seat next to me, and I took their bird, and I broke it into many pieces. Because if I wasn't going to have my bird right, nobody was going to have their bird right. But that didn't make me feel better, so I went to the next chair next to me, and I took that bird, and I broke it too. But that didn't make me feel better. And then I went to the next chair after that, and I broke their bird. Would you believe me that that day I broke 41 birds? There were 41 of us in the kindergarten class in Argentina. You know, I hadn't been to therapy yet at that time, and therefore I didn't know that trying the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result, is called insanity. I see many of you have been to therapy too. So the teacher came back and saw a bunch of paper in front of me after the break, and she said, what happened here? And I tried to explain, but I couldn't. I started crying, and she didn't have any mercy on me. She sent me home to make 41 birds. But then something happened at home. My mother, she sat next to me for all 2 weeks while I was making birds. And I realized that there was a love that was greater than my failures. It was my first encounter that I remember with the verse that says, where sin abounded, grace abounded even more. It was my first encounter, and it changed my life, and it gave me a view of God that now I cherish, and is the core of my life and ministry, that truly there is such a love that is greater than our failures. So before we start our topic this morning, I want to define for you what the gospel is in the background of the Old Testament. Because we call a lot of things the gospel. I'm going to take some of these things away so I have more room here. We call a lot of things the gospel, but actually the gospel was an actual term that was used when the messengers came from the battlefield with the good news that the king had won. This is the background of the word evangelion in Greek that is used several times in the Septuagint. See, we always think that is a New Testament term, but the truth is evangelion, evangelio in Spanish, gospel in English, is used several times in the Old Testament because the background of the word was actually this, that the messenger came with news from the battlefield. If it was good news, they would be yelling evangelion in Greek or bashar in Hebrew. And if it was bad news, they would obviously be yelling something else. And they would gallop in a particular way or run in a particular way so that the people waiting in the city, you know, watching from top of the walls of the city, they would know far away if it was good news or bad news. So it is important that you know that this is the background of the word. So when they saw the messenger coming, yelling this evangelion or bashar, depending if it was Greek or Hebrew, they would know that they were slaves no more because their king had won. This is the term that was chosen by the New Testament writers to explain the salvific news of Jesus Christ that we call the gospel. So it's important that you know that the gospel is the victory cry that comes from the battlefield saying that the king has won and the war is over. So if your good news is not sounding like a woohoo, it's not good news. All right? So that is. I'm not going to go into a lot of the scholarly things on this, but I just want to give you an example of how much we have missed this. I'm going to give you an example, 2 examples actually. I didn't have this in my notes, but I see some of you taking notes that I want to show you. First, I'm going to show you a verse in the Old Testament where the evangelion is used twice, and that's Isaiah 52:7, right before Isaiah 53, right? Isaiah 52:7. By the way, I tell pastors, always work with the Septuagint because there you will find the background of the words that are in the New Testament when you're trying to give the gospel, and you will see the background of them, right? The Greek Old Testament that actually the New Testament writers used to quote the Old Testament. They all quote the Septuagint. Isaiah 52:7, for example, uses the word evangelion twice. How lovely on the mountains are the feet of him who brings good news. See, most people didn't realize that this is talking about the messengers that are coming from the battlefield, right? How lovely on the mountains are the feet of him who brings the good news, who announces peace, who brings the good news again, twice in this verse, of happiness, and announces salvation and says to Zion, your God reigns. How lovely are the feet of those who come from the battlefield announcing that your God reigns. This is the background of the word gospel. Now, like I said, this was not on my notes, and this is only the introduction. This is not where I'm going to spend my time. But let me show you Revelation 14. Most people preach the 3 angels' messages without realizing that the background is still the same. As a matter of fact, chapter 14, verse 1 of Revelation is the background of the 3 angels' messages, and usually we don't read it. It's the only place in all of Revelation that Mount Zion is actually named. You don't find Mount Zion anywhere else in the book of Revelation, only on chapter 14:1. And the Lamb is standing on Zion, is reigning on Zion. So you have to know that the Revelation message of Revelation 14 is the vision that he sees with the Lamb now reigning on Zion as it had been prophesied. He has won the battle. He's reigning on Zion. And when John is seeing this, God says, don't worry, I'm sending 3 messengers with the everlasting gospel, with the good news that Jesus wins. And you know how we summarize the 3 angels' messages? The first message says, God the Creator wins, worship him. The second angel says, the other power lost. The third angel says, choose the one who wins. Those are the 3 angels' messages. Okay? So it's important that you know. Yeah, some of you are writing it down. I'm going to say it again. Because it actually is quite simple. If you read the good news of the gospel with the background that the Lamb is reigning. Let's read it, chapter 14:1. I looked, and behold, the Lamb was standing on Mount Zion, which means that he's reigning on Mount Zion. Only time in all of the book of Revelation. John sees this. He sees the 144,000 because nobody is missing from chapter 7 to chapter 14, nobody's missing. They are all there. They're singing a new song. And he's like, woohoo! And then God says, I'm sending 3 more messengers, the bearers of the everlasting gospel. And what is this good news? Because sometimes the way we preach this doesn't sound like good news at all. It's good news. Our King has won. That's what gospel means. Our King has won. And so, first angel, the Creator God, he wins. Worship him. Second angel, the other power lost. Third angel, choose the one who won. How about that? Is that simple enough? Well, good news has to sound like good news. Good news is a victory cry from the battlefield. All right. Now that we know what gospel is, perhaps we can start realizing that many things that we have called gospel is not the gospel. The gospel is what Christ has done 2,000 years ago. The gospel is outside of us. It happened over there 2,000 years ago. He won the victory, and that's the gospel. It's outside of us. It's not what we do. It's not even what the Holy Spirit does in us or through us, as far as merits of salvation is concerned. The gospel stands on its own, outside of us. It's a righteousness not of our own, apart from the law and the prophets, of which the law and the prophets testified. And it's given to us as a gift, as an undeserved gift. That is the gospel of Jesus Christ. Now, once we understand that, a lot of principles will come out of this as a result of accepting the gospel. And I was asked to talk this morning about how to change the cultures of the churches by giving them the gospel, a deep understanding of the gospel. And we're going to do that through the story of the Samaritan woman. I realized that Jesus also had to face a lot of cultural challenges that actually were anti-gospel patterns that we are all facing now in our churches. And you have the privilege of bringing a victory cry that says, this is done. The way we spell salvation is D-O-N-E. And it is your way. It is your way to say, Evangelion, Evangelion, the King has won. And what does that mean practically for our churches and our culture? And some of our churches that are not safe. You know, being in media myself, I struggle when somebody calls and says, I want a church to attend in this and this area. I struggle to know what church to send them to. I struggle because I want them to come to a church that will embrace them and be safe, and a church that doesn't, confuse reverence with depression. I want a church that has a woohoo, right? Yeah, preach it, sister. Okay, so now we're going to see some of the things that Jesus had to face with the culture of the time. And I found that he faced a lot of things that we face in our own churches. So let's go to John chapter 4. I know you know the story, but I want to share with you a few things from the narrative, perhaps some from the Greek, that I think are unique, that will give us some answers. And then you will have a time after my talk to actually discuss this among yourselves in your tables. So I know all of you know this, but let me just mention it again so that we don't miss it in the story. John has a very important tool in his narratives, and is that he writes the whole gospel in two levels. I'm sure you know this, but I just want to remind you. The whole gospel of John is written in two levels. The level that meets the eye, which is what the culture says. And then a second level, which is the one that Jesus offers with the gospel principles. Those who believe in him enter the second level. So every story in the Gospel of John has two levels and a dialogue between both levels. It's a fascinating thing. And if you ever want to do a fantastic series on the two levels of each story in the Gospel of John. Nicodemus, you got to be born again. How can I be born again and enter into my mother's womb? No, says Jesus, no, I'm not talking about this level. I'm talking about this level. Samaritan woman, give me some water, but ask me for water. I have a different type of water. Sir, the well is deep. You don't have a bucket. How can you get this living water? No, says Jesus, I'm not talking about this water. I'm talking about this water. Every single story in the Gospel of John has two levels. The one you see that is culturally acceptable to them, and the one that Jesus offers as an alternative, the gospel culture. Chapter 9, the Pharisees thought that they could see, but end up being blind. But the one that was blind ends up seeing. Same thing with Lazarus. Every story in the Gospel of John has two levels. And the Samaritan woman, obviously, is no exception. Now, I want to call your attention before we actually start the main narrative. A couple of things here. Chapter 4, verse 4. Chapter 4, verse 4 says, he had to pass through Samaria. What an interesting choice of verb. Had to. Because all of us that study the first century and we dedicated our lives to looking at the maps of the first century, we know that no Jew ever had to go through Samaria because they had built a road around Samaria. So no Jew ever had to go through Samaria. So when you read had to, it's not a geographical need. Because we know there was a road around Samaria. So he had to for other reasons. Because he had to be deliberate in going to see this woman and changing her culture with the gospel. Just as the way you will go back to your churches because you have to bring the gospel to your people. So he had to go to Samaria. And it's interesting because this is an area that is filled with heritage. Check this out. Chapter 4, verse 4. He had to go through Samaria. So he came to a city of Samaria called Sychar, near the parcel of ground that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. Very important details here. When you see details like that, stop and check it out. Go to the Old Testament. When did Jacob give this land to his son Joseph? This is fascinating. Did you know? Oh, I love this. That Sychar and Shechem and Dothan, where Joseph was sold into slavery, all that area, Jacob gave as an inheritance to Joseph. Joseph came to own as an inheritance the very land where he was sold into slavery. All of Sychar and Shechem and Dothan are all in the same area, and Joseph became the owner of the land where he was sold into slavery. Talk about a full circle. Yeah, so it's fantastic, isn't it? All these little details that are in the narrative, we haven't even started. So the heritage in this area is strong. And she will bring it up in the narrative with Jesus, in the dialogue between the two levels of water. And so here we have 4 things I want you to know before we start the dialogue. 2 are very known. You know, she comes at noon, which means she's filled with shame. You know, she doesn't want anybody to see her. Second, we know she's lonely because coming to get water from the well is the activity that the women in the city did together. They came all together. Like if you wanted to get a wife in the Bible, where did you go? To the well. And maybe some of you should build some wells in your churches. Yeah. So they came to the well, right? They came to the well. Well, she came alone because no other woman wanted to be seen with her. So we know she was filled with shame because of the time she came. We know that she was alone. But there are 2 more things we know from the culture that you might be interested in. One is that she was considered an outcast because the culture said that after 3 divorces, not 5 like she has, 3 divorces, you became an outcast. You were no longer invited to people's homes. You couldn't go to the church of the time. You were outside after 3 divorces. And she's had 5, so she's a real outcast. And the 4th thing I want you to know is that this woman, see, we have seen her as a loose woman, but in fact, do we have enough batteries, you think? I'm not sure exactly what in the first century, a woman could not request a divorce. So she's the most rejected woman we have in the Bible. The 5 men who married her eventually rejected her. Everybody that had known her intimately rejected her. 5 men rejected her. She didn't even have a say-so in the first century as to if she wanted a divorce or not. Only men could initiate divorce. And so she is rejected by 5 men, and the 6th man is rejecting her in the worst way. He won't even give her the last name. He won't even bring her to his kingship. He only wants her for sex, which is the worst type of rejection. So, now that you know he's filled with shame and lonely and rejected and an outcast, perhaps now we can understand how Jesus met all these cultural challenges and avoidance patterns that she brings to the narrative with the gospel. So we're going to actually watch a video to introduce the dialogue of the Samaritan woman, what she might look like today when she enters your church. So let's do that.
I am a woman of no distinction, of little importance. I am a woman of no reputation save that which is bad. You whisper as I pass by and cast judgmental glances, though you don't really take the time to look at me or even get to know me. For to be known is to be loved, and to be loved is to be known, and otherwise what's the point in doing either one of them in the first place? I want to be known. I want someone to look at my face and not just see 2 eyes, a nose, a mouth, and 2 ears, but to see all that I am and could be, all my hopes, loves, and fears. That's too much to hope for, to wish for, or pray for, so I don't, not anymore. Now I keep to myself, and by that I mean the pain that keeps me in my own private jail, the pain that's brought me here at midday to this well. To ask for a drink is no big request, but to ask it of me, a woman unclean, ashamed, used and abused, an outcast, a failure, a disappointment, a sinner, no drink passing from these hands to your lips could ever be refreshing, only condemning, as I'm sure you condemn me now, but you don't. You're a man of no distinction, though of the utmost importance, a man with little reputation, at least so far. You whisper and tell me to my face what all those glances have been about, and you take the time to really look at me, but don't need to get to know me, for to be known is to be loved, and to be loved is to be known, and you know me. You actually know me, all of me and everything about me, every thought inside and hair on top of my head, every hurt stored up, every hope, every dread, my past and my future, all I am and could be. You tell me everything. You tell me about me. And that which is spoken by another would bring hate and condemnation. Coming from you brings love, grace, mercy, hope, and salvation. I've heard of one to come who would save a wretch like me, and here in my presence you say, I am he. To be known is to be loved, and to be loved is to be known. And I just met you, but I love you. I don't know you, but I want to get you. Let me run back to town. This is way too much for just me. There are others, brothers, sisters, lovers, haters, the good and the bad, sinners and saints, who should hear what you've told me, who should see what you've shown me, who should taste what you gave me, who should feel how you forgave me. For to be known is to be loved, and to be loved is to be known. And they all need this too. We all do need it for our own.
So when we face the gospel, we carry trash bags that are cultural trash bags. Things that we were preset with in our heads. And the gospel will take these away and lay them at the foot of the cross. For ourselves as pastors, for our members, and for those who would walk into our churches. So we're going to look at 5 trash bags this morning. If you're taking notes, I'm going to name them with one word, each one of them, things you will have to challenge in the culture of your church that are anti-gospel, and how Jesus answered those anti-gospel tendencies in the culture of our churches, how he answered them with the gospel. And I'm hoping that you will find practical ways to implement these, and perhaps when you talk among yourselves afterwards, you will share some of the things that you've tried to challenge these. So we have the two levels. And the dialogue between the two levels starts between Jesus and the Samaritan woman. And so here we go, verse 7, chapter 4, verse 7. There came a woman of Samaria to draw water, and Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." For his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. And the Samaritan woman uses the first avoidance pattern, powerful anti-gospel challenge of the culture called prejudice. This is one of the main behaviors in our churches that we must target. Prejudice. And she said to him, the Samaritan woman said to him, verse 9, "How is it that you, being a Jew, ask me for a drink since I'm a Samaritan woman? For Jews have no dealing with Samaritans," is the parenthetical statement that John adds. The first anti-gospel pattern that Jesus finds in this avoidance of this woman is prejudice. And how does Jesus answer this prejudice issue? Jesus answers it in a way that he didn't answer anything else in the four Gospels. Chapter 4, verse 10. Jesus answered and said to her, "You would expect a lecture on Samaritans and Jews. You would expect a lecture that says, sure, Samaritans were taken 722 BC by Assyrians and got so confused with gods that they didn't know who to worship. And you guys only accept the Pentateuch as inspired. And we Jews accept the rest of the Bible." No, Jesus didn't say any of that. Jesus answered in this way with a gospel statement. He said, "If you knew the gift of God." Interesting that he answers by saying the gospel is a gift for all. The ground is even at the foot of the cross because it's an undeserved gift. This is the only time in all four gospels that Jesus talks about salvation as a gift from God. It's an unusual statement in the Gospels. Paul will take it later, of course, and develop the gift. We know it very well. Romans 3, 23, 24. We all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God and are justified as a gift by his grace through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus. Paul uses the word gift often. Jesus, in the Gospels, only uses it here, this one time. To this woman, who the first thing that he found was, hey, there's groups here, and you're crossing lines. Oh, Jesus says, "I bring for you a gift." A gift is for all. It's an undeserved gift. If you knew the gift of God and who it is who says to you, "Give me a drink," you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. Oh, this gift is for the asking. It's ready to go. That's how Jesus met the challenge of prejudice, by saying the gospel is a gift. It's undeserved. Nobody deserves it. No black or white, no men or women, not old and young. Nobody deserves it. And yet everybody can have it just with the asking. That's how he met the challenge of prejudice. Now, how this would look like in your churches, only you know. I believe that preaching and teaching is a very powerful tool because you do it with words and you do it with actions. Maybe you want to include all kinds of people in your worship service, men and women, children and adults. Maybe this is the way you make a statement that prejudice does not go in your church, because prejudice is not a gospel principle. And so Jesus answers by saying, it is a gift. And the first avoidance pattern has been shattered by the gospel. But there's more. Because this woman has been hurt, as many of us have been, so we carry these things with us. It's not just for the members of the church, it's also for the pastors, you know. Verse 11, she said to him, Sir, you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where do you get this living water? You are not greater than our father Jacob, are you, who gave us this well and drank of it himself and his sons and his cattle? Who are you? Are you greater than our father Jacob? Can you imagine being in Jesus' shoes? Excuse me? What did you say? What did you ask me? Did you ask me if I'm greater than your father Jacob? Excuse me, I am the great I am. I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and here's my business card if you need a miracle, and don't you ever ask me anything like that again. Wouldn't you like to show your authority, your credentials, your denomination, your role, your rank, your pedigree? If somebody could have shown superiority, it was Jesus. He could have said, excuse me for a moment. He could have sent 200 angels and say, ta-da, greater than your father Jacob. Jesus is deaf to the language of superiority. Unfortunately, we haven't been. You know, I know this. I have taken my heritage so many times and used them to crush other people. What is your denomination? Oh, no, my denomination is better than your denomination. We actually have this all together. We are the people that will be saved. It's more, you know, I used to have a last name that was known in the church. My dad was the white estate director for the General Conference, right before Jim Nix. So I was somebody. I remember being in Argentina. My father was known. He was the president of the union there. We used to have a last name. They used to bring us to the front rows. You know that type of language that says, who's your daddy type of language? That for many, many years, we have somehow motivated in the church. An elder that decides to take over a group of people, whether it's white or black or men or women. No. And you know how Jesus answers this who's your daddy type of language? He comes and says, your heritage is your blessing, but it's not your identity. The gospel is your identity. You cannot decide, oh, I am disciple of Jacob, I'm disciple of Moses, I'm an Adventist. That's not your main identity. Your main identity is, I am a Christian. And of the Christians, and I am an Adventist. You know how many Adventists that are there that are not Christians? Many. That believe in salvation by tofu. And I actually, now let me tell you this. I have no problem with tofu. Other people do. I have no problem with tofu. But yes, when it sounds like a merit for salvation, then I have a problem with tofu. So Jesus answered and said, verse 13, everyone who drinks of this water will thirst again, but whoever drinks of the water that I will give him shall never thirst. The water that I will give him will become in him a well of water springing for eternal life. Jesus says there's a different identity than your heritage and your denomination and your diet. There is an identity that is me, Jesus says. I am your identity. I am the water you need to drink. And the identity based on the gospel is deeply satisfying and productive because it becomes a fountain inside of you. How important is that you set an identity for your church that is based on the gospel, on the battle cry that says Jesus has won. And we all don't deserve it, yet we have it. That's our identity. You know, if people in your church are talking in the way that sounds like we're better than everybody else, that was not God's plan. That was not, and is still not, God's plan. The gospel is even ground at the foot of the cross. So Jesus says, okay, I have a different water. Let's stop talking about Samaritans and Jacob and all these things that you're wanting me to talk about, says Jesus, because I had to come through Samaria, and it wasn't because of that. I had to come for you. So the woman said to him, the two levels, keep dialoguing between the two levels. And the woman said, verse 15, Sir, give me this water. I will not be thirsty, nor come all the way here to draw. And he said to her, Go call your husband and come here. Woo-hoo. At some point, you got to get personal. None of us like that. But like the woman of the video said, to be known is to be loved, and to be loved is to be known. Most of us have spent our lives hiding, myself included. Go call your husband and come here. And the third avoidance pattern is called superficiality. It's superficial truth. It's the truth we give when we don't want to be known. And she said, I have no husband. And Jesus said, yeah, you kind of told the truth, yeah. You correctly said, I have no husband, for you have had 5 husbands, and the one to whom you're married now to whom you have now is not your husband. The way that Jesus met superficiality was with reality. He said, no, there is a real life here, and I accept you and love you in spite of that reality. It's when you have to stop hiding in your church, when your members no longer have to hide. It's when you created a culture that is real, where people come to get help, not glances. When people come to get compassion, not condemnation. It's a church that puts together 12-step programs or celebrate recovery or brings a counselor once a week for people that want help. It's people that I don't know, have centers for recovery addiction or whatever it is. It's real. It's not a made-up church. You know? I went through hard times in my life, and I know exactly how the Samaritan woman was feeling. Because our church did not know how to help people in trouble for a long time. You know, we all have a different biography than the one that they write on the programs. You know, we have it's funny because they said, send your biography. And I always think, which one? And so I understand the one they want. They want the one that will give you the titles and the experience. And so I send the 2 masters, the PhD, this, that. Someday I will shock somebody, send me my second biography. Because the truth is, I was married to my first husband for 15 years. And he was unfaithful over and over. And he had a little problem with unfaithfulness, and I had a big problem trying to control his unfaithfulness. And at one point, I had to leave. I really had to leave. And it wasn't in my plans to file for divorce, because I had the perfect life and the perfect last name. You know what I mean? It was difficult to face the fact that life wasn't perfect. Now I can talk about it because 20 years have gone by, actually more. I've been married to my current husband for almost 20 years. He's my second husband. He had 3 daughters when we got married, and I have 9 grandchildren through those 3 daughters. And God had another life for me, which is the life I have now, 20 years later. But I know exactly what it feels like to come to church in the middle of the day so nobody will ask me any questions at the entrance. I know what it feels like to come at 11:45 and try to not find a deacon that will try to get into my personal life just to gossip about it, not to help me. And at that time, my dad was the director of the White Estate for the General Conference, while I was getting divorced and getting tested for AIDS. And you know what? What's so amazing? I was getting letters from all over the world not to encourage me, but with opinions, because people love to talk about things that they don't know anything about. Something amazing happens when we create a safe church where people can be real. I never left the church. I was blessed to have a support group, but you know what? My support group was not in the church. The church did not know how to help me. I was so blessed to have been able to attend programs and self-help programs and counselors and therapy and a bunch of things. And God provided help for me that was real, and it was outside of the church. I have a dream of safe churches, so safe that when you ask me how I'm doing, I can really tell you. I have a dream that we'll have safe churches, that if I say to you, happy Sabbath, everybody, you know what I'm talking about, everybody fighting in the car, we get to church, we're the perfect family, right? And somebody says, happy Sabbath, how are you doing? Oh, we're doing great. We're all doing peachy. And yet, your kid is on drugs, and your other kid is in jail, and your sister is getting divorced, and you don't know what's going to happen with your husband or with your wife. I have the dream that when you ask me how I'm doing, I can really tell you. And I can say, please pray for me. Well, people will say, where is your husband? And I would say, he's not feeling good. And inside of me, I was like, well, I certainly hope he's not feeling good, because he shouldn't be feeling good, because who knows where he is right now and with whom. And I want to be able to be so honest as to come and say, please pray for me, and not just for the situation, but, the neighbor is treating me very well, so please pray for me. Wouldn't you want that type of a church? I want that type of a church. Because Jesus met superficiality with reality that came with acceptance and love. And the acceptance was so great, and the love was so great that people were attracted to Jesus. Have you ever wondered why the holiness of Jesus never repelled anybody? I always wondered about that. Because he was the holiest of holies, and the sinners wanted to be next to him. How was that possible? That's not what happens in our churches. So, can you imagine how this woman felt when Jesus said that he knew everything about her? Yeah, have you ever received such strong news that you need to walk them off or something, like in a movie that somebody says, I love you, and the person says, one moment please, and they go behind a wall and they shake it off and come all composed? Have you seen that in a movie? I think that's what happened to this woman, because Jesus says, yeah, you told the truth. You had 5 husbands, and the one you're with is not your husband. Excuse me, please. I think she went behind the well and said, how does he know that? How does he know that? Nobody knows that. Because the next verse says, I see you're a prophet. But I'm sure that this woman was absolutely, completely with her jaw on the floor. I mean, how would you like it if someday you walked in and, the skeletons in your closet are on the screen? So Jesus has already met prejudice, and has met superiority, and has met superficiality, and this woman will pull the strongest, most powerful tool against the gospel. Next in the dialogue. See, when we start getting personal, we all start getting a little uncomfortable. And this woman could ask Jesus anything, about anything. She could ask him about, what's going on? How come all this is happening to me? Tell me about your love. How come you know these things and you still love me and you still talk to me? What's going on? You know what she chose? Let's talk about mountains. Do we worship on that mountain or that mountain? That's called religiosity. Religiosity is the forced avoidance pattern. Religiosity is an addiction to rules and regulations. It's when the whole culture of the church becomes religiosity. It's when the whole culture of the church becomes a list. You cannot do this, you cannot do this, you cannot do that, you cannot wear that, that dress is too short, that dress is too long, we cannot worship like this, we can worship like that. Is the color of the carpet supposed to be brown or blue? Is 3 hours, 5 hours of church boards talking about mountains? That's religiosity. You know why we're missing a whole generation in the church today? Because of mountains. And you know what happens? Now you're going to get me preaching. You know, I travel the whole world, and I travel apologizing to young adults for what we did to them. You know, because today I'm dressed like this because I'm with you, and 2 weeks from now I might be in a stadium full of young adults with a full band behind me, praising the Lord in the way they praise Him. And maybe in an island, you will go to a service, and I don't know, people might be wearing coconuts and straw. I don't know. It's different. And you know what? We have chosen preferences over principles for many, many years. Preferences over principles. You know, and I have to tell you this. It's wonderful, it's wonderful, it's wonderful if you want to minister to an audience that worships in a particular way. But please don't let a whole group leave the church because you did not know how to accommodate the way they worship. Because organ versus drums versus saxophone versus guitar is not a principle. It's a preference. And the principle, Jesus will give it to worship in spirit and in truth. That's the principle. That's the principle. Don't let people get away with their preference. It's an anti-gospel principle to take your preference and make it into a principle. So if you have to do two services, one with drums and one with organ, do that. Let's learn to think with the genius of the and not with the tyranny of the or. The tyranny of the or places us in a box. The genius of the and makes us inclusive. And so here we have this woman saying, what mountain? This religiosity. You know, I have to say this. This is not in my notes, but I have to tell you. Religiosity is the opposite of spirituality. It's a pitiful religion because it has no joy, it has no Jesus, it has no woohoo, it has none of that. This is the religion that confuses depression with reverence. This is the religiosity. I have to tell you this. When I was going to 12-step programs on codependency for 3 years, trying to understand what was happening to me back then, 20 years ago, I learned a slogan that I never forgot. Religiosity is for those who are afraid of going to hell. Spirituality is for those who have already been there. Say it again. Preach it, sister. Yeah. Religiosity is for those who are afraid of going to hell. Spirituality is for those who have already been there. Many of us, through pain, will cross those 13 inches. Did you know that the longest journey a person will ever take is only 13 inches and goes from the head to the heart? And most of us will travel that through pain and suffering. Before my divorce, I was the perfect Pharisee. I had all the answers. My thinking was black and white. If you had any questions, come and ask me. I had pedigree. I was born in the church. You know, all these things that we say. Well, this shattered my pride. And I'm thankful, because if you have had the blessing of being on the floor, knowing that all the things that you thought you know nothing about, that's when you have only one thing left, and that's God, and that's when you realize God is enough. And, many of you are going through things that nobody knows. Some of you are addicted to porn. Some of you have committed adultery. Some of you have done different things nobody knows them about. Let me tell you, God knows about them. He loves you and accepts you and wants to help you. And on top of that, wants to free you from the craziness of religiosity. He wants to free you as pastors, as the members of your church, as a culture. He wants to free us. He wants a woohoo in our hearts, not because our life is perfect, but because his sacrifice was. And so Jesus meets this religiosity thing with worship. Worship in spirit and truth. Let's read it. Chapter 4, verse 20. Our fathers worshipped in this mountain, and you people say that in Jerusalem is the place where men ought to worship. Jesus said to her, Woman, believe me, an hour is coming when neither in this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. Verse 23, an hour is coming and is now here when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For such people the Father seek to be his worshipers. God is looking for worshipers that will worship in spirit and truth. And actually, in this gospel, Jesus will claim and declare himself to be the truth. So the worship is not about hands like that, or saxophone, or drums, or organ. The issue is worship him, the truth. Worship in spirit and truth. Worship the way you are, in the way you understand. Just worship the one that has given you this gift of salvation. So, prejudice, superiority, superficiality, religiosity, and she uses the last one that we call procrastination. The woman said to him, I know the Messiah is coming. When he comes, he will tell us all things. This is in the future. I don't have to make any changes right now. I don't have to address this. Our eschatology is perfect. Someday, when he comes, he will solve everything. But let me tell you, if your eschatology has trumped your soteriology, you are in trouble. Because soteriology is the reason why we have a real eschatology. Because nobody's getting white robes if it's not for the blood of the Lamb. So the truth is, when your identity has become only eschatology, you will always talk about the kingdom as a future thing. Someday the Messiah will come. That's the day we will all worship together. That's the day all different races will be able to get along. That's the day when we won't have any more. No, Jesus says, I am today. I am right now. So Jesus confronts this okay later mentality that we call procrastination. And he says, but I am. I am. And Jesus answers to her, I who speak to you am he, verse 26, and unfortunately in the translation we miss the I am. This is the actual I am. This is the ego eimi in Greek. This is the I am that will be introducing Jesus for the rest of the gospel. I am the vine, I am the shepherd, I am the bread, I am the truth, I am the resurrection, I am the life. I mean, for all of us that have believed in the gospel, the principles of the gospel are present. They are not only a future reality. I buried both of my parents in the last 5 years, and I'm an only child, so it was a difficult thing to do. The I am, the resurrection and the life, became very, very present for me. When I went to bury my dad in the same tomb where my mom was, I asked the cemetery they would allow me to bring a key, and I brought a key, and I put it inside the tomb, and the cemetery said, why? I said, because I believe in one who said that he has the keys of death. I said, I'm going to put a key inside the tomb, and the next one to open this is going to be Jesus. And he's going to see that I believed his promise. Because it became a present reality for me that I will see them again. Not because my eschatology is perfect, but because my soteriology tells me that the center of the true theology is a person. And he says, I am the resurrection and the life. So the 5 challenges met with the gospel principles. Jesus met this procrastination with a revelation of himself for that moment, for that day. And it's the only time, verse 26, ego eimi, is the only time that Jesus reveals that he's the Messiah to someone before his crucifixion and trial. He never revealed to anybody that he was the Messiah at this level, publicly, except the Samaritan woman. A woman who had had 5 husbands, and the one that she was with was not her husband. And you know what happened? Let me tell you what happened. Something amazing happened. This woman, and it's very beautiful because throughout the whole gospel, we have the 2 waters. Jesus saying, I have a different water. And this woman saying, no, but I came for this water. Where the well is deep, this and that. And Jesus kept saying, but I have a different water. Exchange it with me. Leave your water pot. And she kept saying, no, I'm lonely, I'm ashamed, and I superior, prejudice, all these things, superficiality, and religiosity, and procrastination. And then Jesus says, I am. And look what happened. I love these details in the Bible. Verse 28, the woman left her water pot. The woman left her water pot. She left it because she had taken a little sip of living water. And something amazing happened to her. She left her water pot and went out and did all the things that her culture did not allow her to do before. She went to the city, and look what she did. At verse 28, the woman left her water pot and went into the city and said to all the men, and don't you love her testimony? You know, let me tell you, you can go blue in the face doing evangelism seminars in your church. If people didn't get it, they didn't get it. When they get the gospel, watch out. When they get the gospel, they go out with a woohoo in their hearts. And look at her testimony. Verse 29, verse 39, always the same testimony. Come see someone who knows everything about me, and he's still talking to me. He has to be the Christ. That's her testimony. Come see a man who knows everything about me, and he's still talking to me. He has to be the Christ. I never met a man who really knew me, who still talks to me. This is the man. And do you know that she became the most successful evangelist that we have in all 4 Gospels? We don't have anybody else in all 4 Gospels that converted a whole town like the Samaritan woman. Well, today I want to invite you to make the exchange. For you as a pastor, for you as a church that you pastor, and for the newcomers that are coming in, that they, instead of finding prejudice, they might find the gift of salvation. Instead of finding superiority, that they might find the identity of the gospel ingrained in your church. That instead of superficiality, they might find acceptance and love. That instead of religiosity, they might find worship in spirit and truth. And that instead of procrastination, they might find a relevant Messiah that is well and alive today. And you know, the gospel is actually given to us in this language of exchange. You all know this by heart, but I'm going to read it anyways. Isaiah 53. Look at the pronouns. Look at the pronouns. You know this game that people play in Christmas that everybody brings a gift and you kind of exchange? Well, the truth is, the gospel is that we came to the party with death because the wages of sin is death. Jesus showed up to the party with life, and we exchanged. And we walked away with eternal life, and he walked away with death. That's the great exchange of the gospel. Look at Isaiah 53:5, and look at the pronouns. He was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Look at the pronouns, this exchange of water pots. The Bible ends with a phrase like no another. Chapter 22, verse 17 of Revelation, the church joins the Spirit in becoming welcoming welcoming people to come and drink of the water of life. There's no other verse like it, where there's not just the Spirit asking, the bride, the church, joins in the invitation. Chapter 22 of Revelation, verse 17, the Spirit and the bride, the church, say, come. And let the one who hears say, come. And let the one who is thirsty come. And let the one who wishes take the water of life without cost to us, but it cost him his life. May your churches become gospel churches. And may you be all known by your abundant grace. Where sin abounded, grace abounded even more. May you be known, people saying, grace is their story, and they're sticking to it. God bless you.